I'm gonna track knowledge and networks kind of as they go together. Our goal is to figure out how knowledge flows from client scientists to practice. And so I definitely have network side, and we'll talk about some of the knowledge side. Some of the questions driving this, which I'll touch back on, I hope it's big enough to see. How is knowledge about climate change transformed as it diffuses through social structure? How does transformation depend on the nature of the social structure? We don't have an answer to that yet, but we're working on it. How do the roles different people play in the diffusion of knowledge relate to their location in the social structure? And then how are opportunities for interaction structured by institutional forces? I'll get to each of these. I know they're kind of weird, complex questions. You're going, how could you possibly get at those? And I'll see if I can take you through them a little bit. The context here is we'll be dealing with scientists, translators, mediators, or boundary groups, and practitioners in the Great Lakes. And we will eventually, but just a hint of it today, talk about changes in lake levels and frequency and duration of freeze-thaw cycles. And I cannot say that 10 times fast, although I have tried. So this is all preliminary, so I just got to wave my hands. We're kind of in the middle here, all right? So this is not to run around and say it's definitive. I've got preliminary, I think, up on most of the slides. So how is knowledge transformed as it diffuses through the social structure? I have 2 points here, and I'll add a third. So one of the things we found in our interviews, and I think we've heard it again today, is that as people talk, say a mediator, say one of the boundary organizations, as they talk to their stakeholders, their clients, sometimes they don't use the language of climate change. And so they will use climate models, or here's our prediction, or something like that. And so even at that point, the language has changed, and because there's not often a reference to the models of climate change, the knowledge has started to become transformed. It's not quite in the same form it was because you might not understand the driving forces, and you might not be able to go look in the literature for connections to it. Another aspect that I don't have up on the slide but I want to bring out is that the knowledge is localized as it's applied. So what you get is someone like Dan Brown or something saying, well, we have these models, and then he goes in his back room for 2 days, right, and comes out and says, for your little location, here are some of the implications. All right, so that's a transformation of the knowledge. And then even the person on the receiving end might say, okay, so that means the Huron River will experience this particular effect. We projected, right? That might be different than the Pure Marquette River or whatever else you're looking at. So in the localization, the knowledge is transformed as well. So that has certain implications. One implication is that the end user may not know knowledge to be associated with climate change. The second is, for us, we typically study the diffusion of innovations, the diffusion of knowledge, and it's awfully hard to study when people are calling it different things and when it's kind of morphing as it goes through. So this is not especially a network finding, which is more what I've known for, but I'm just highlighting the fact that knowledge is changing, and it's an intriguing part of what's going on here. It's not always what happens with diffusion of knowledge, but it does seem to be happening here. The second question, how does the transformation depend on the nature of the social structure through which it diffuses? I've got a little bit of a straw man argument here, so I know that, but you'll see how it plays out. In Wisconsin, they have this wiki, and it's kind of this distributed approach. It's the name is a pun on the wiki, W-I-K, and theirs is W-I-C. And the idea is that you can join these different user groups, these different chat rooms, and through that, knowledge can diffuse. In contrast, the Great Lakes, the Michigan, more centric, a little bit more what you've been seeing today, has sort of woven a fabric of interactions through a set of conferences, document production, and things like that. And it actually creates different social structures which could have different implications for how knowledge diffuses. I'm going to show you some pictures of those social structures. And we don't really know yet the implications of for how the knowledge will diffuse, but we're going to get there. Well, I hope this is big enough, maybe not. But from the right, on the right-hand side of this, you can see the various wiki groups laid out. And you can join one group. You can join more than one, but most people join a fairly small number, I think. And then even within these, they have broken down groups, and it's sort of this distributed virtual structure. Okay, so that's kind of the Wisconsin structure. So in this picture, each square represents a mini conference or some event where people gathered. It might actually be a document that was co-produced. And the dots represent people who participated in the events. And what you're seeing right now, the lines indicate, a line from a circle to a square indicates somebody who participated in that event. And the highlighted, the active events here with the lines going to them were in 2009. You can see in 2009, there were a set of events sponsored mostly by NOAA that had this little emergent, nascent cluster of people participating. As we look over time, other organizations started to generate events that got a little bit different participation. In particular, if we go down here, we get these Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Coordination Group. It's up here, and you can see kind of a new group, the purplish group, mauve, generating around a new set of events which are not entirely NOAA-centric. And this is circa 2010, 2011. And you also have some GLISA-sponsored events. So now you see how GLISA started to enter the system as its own source of a separate network. Okay, good. And then as we add in 2012, you can see that there's really a now defined mauve group and a light green group, with GLISA bridging a little bit between these events. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. A couple of observations to take from this. One is that there are discernible groups, but there are certain events that bridge across groups. If you didn't have those events, you would have a very, I'm going to call it NOAA-centric group over here, which might have a difficult time collaborating with, or there would be limited exposure between the people participating here and the people participating in some of the other events, such as the Midwest Climate Group or something like that. So with these emergence of new events, you have the possibility for people to bridge between different parts of the social system. That's pretty important. You could also use this as a diagnostic tool, and you could identify some places where there's structural holes, as we call them, where there's limited exposure from people in one part of the sociogram to people in the other, and you could start to do something about that. And in fact, NOAA and GLISA were at some level aware of this phenomenon without visually displaying it like this. And so some of the events that were generated, and I believe it's this one right here, was explicitly intended to bridge between members of different groups. It was NOAA trying to reach out. And so that you can see from this that they were reasonably successful in doing so. Going forward, you could do this more diagnostically. I even think you could do this with the groups that, the clients, the various stakeholders and clients that a given boundary organization was working with. It might prove helpful to understand how the system of people you're working with is networked. The implications, though, going back to the Wisconsin has this one structure, and here we've got this more emergent structure. They could be diffusing and transforming knowledge in different ways. The movement of knowledge through the wiki system could be different than the movement of knowledge through this system. This system, I believe, has a lot more redundancies than the wiki system does. That could be good. You hear about Brent Lofgren's research from 3 different conferences that you go to. But it could be bad. It's slightly less efficient. And so we would just need to think about the implications of that, and we haven't gotten that far. Third question, how does the transformation depend on the nature of the social structure through which it diffuses? That's what I just covered. All right. Fourth question, we've thought a little bit about how opportunities for interaction are structured by different institutional forces. And if we do a whole big sociogram, I know this is a mess. I know it's really hard to look at this one. But in the lower left-hand region, what you have is events that are red and orange colored and black that were sponsored by Wiki or are associated more with the Wisconsin group. And on the right, you have the blues and dark blues, light blues, that are more sort of the eastern side of things. And although it looks like they're close together, if you look at it real closely, which we have done, hard to show here, there isn't a lot of crossover. And so that suggests that there are these different institutional forces creating networks, and at least between these two sets, there is not a lot of crossover. And you know what? Maybe the folks in Wisconsin or somewhere, Minnesota, we have a few folks from Minnesota here, but maybe there's more action over there that we haven't fully incorporated onto the eastern side of things and vice versa. Now, GLISA is clearly trying to span that, with the funding of the different groups in different locations. But we're noticing at this point that right now there is not a lot of direct crossover. Where we are going from here, we are doing a lot of interviews of folks, including folks in this room. We're administering a short survey that asks people about lake levels and freeze-thaw cycles. We're teaming with Maria Carmen Lemos and Scott Califatis to study the documents that were written by this group of people. And we're trying to coordinate with other RISAs and the NCA. That's it.